take a moment, look around your neighborhood, maybe your city center. Have you ever really stopped to think who these places were designed for? Like whose needs came first when the streets, the parks, the buildings went up? It it might surprise you. Historically, it hasn't always been everyone equally.
No, definitely not. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into this really important handbook, actually. It's called Creating Places That Work for Women and Girls. Just came out in March this year. And it's not just theory, it's a proper guide for the people actually doing the designing and building, local authorities, developers, urban designers.
Right. We've got the full document here, and it lays out the challenges women and girls face in public spaces, the real world stuff, but also gives these really concrete, actionable steps. So our mission today is to pull out the key insights, the practical ideas. How can we make our towns and cities genuinely safer, more inclusive for women and girls? Because, spoiler alert, when we do that, it makes things better for everyone.
Yeah, it really does lift the experience for all. One thing we should mention up front, though, the handbook itself gives a content warning, and we want to echo that. It deals with some sensitive topics, things like sexual assault, harassment, discrimination, violence. It's unavoidable when talking about safety.
Absolutely. And the handbook lists resources for Support Samaritans, the LGBT Foundation, Gallup, Rape Crisis, the Survivors Trust, Survivors UK, police contacts, too. We just wanted to acknowledge that before we dive in.
And while it originated from the London Legacy Development Corporation, the LLDC,
Right.
Around the Olympic Park area, the ideas, the principles, they're meant to apply much more broadly. They stress that.
Okay. So let's get into it. Part 1 really sets the scene, doesn't it? It's all about trying to understand those lived experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And the core issue, the handbook states it pretty clearly, is that women and girls all over the world face these barriers in public spaces. It affects their everyday lives. And we're not just talking small things. It's systemic stuff, discrimination, inequality, the threat or reality of violence, poverty, that unequal burden of unpaid care work.
Right. The mental load and the actual time spent caring for others.
Yeah, and even things like limited control over assets or just inadequate sanitation in some places. Plus, climate change and rapid urbanization, they're making these problems worse.
And it's not by chance, is it? The handbook points out that for centuries, women's and girls' needs were basically just left out of urban design thinking. You ended up with a male-dominated profession, data collection that missed female experiences, even land use reflecting old-fashioned ideas about who does what work.
Think about it. How many statues in your town center are of women? It's usually not that many, right?
Right. Very few.
And this history, this oversight, it has real consequences for safety, for health, for well-being, for opportunities. It shapes everything.
It even influences the routes women feel safe taking or, what they decide to wear just to feel a bit less vulnerable. The handbook uses this phrase that really sticks.
Oh, wow.
It says, women and girls often shrink their lives to navigate safely.
Wow. Shrink their lives. That's powerful. And fundamentally unacceptable, surely.
Completely unacceptable. But the good news is the handbook isn't just about the problems, it's constructive. It argues, really convincingly, I think, that if we intentionally design for women and girls, we make public spaces safer and fairer for absolutely everyone. It's about tackling gender inequality head on, making sure everyone has fair access, boosting opportunities.
And there are wider benefits too, right? They
Yeah.
link it to things like climate action, sustainable development, even economic growth. It's about unlocking the potential of places by considering everyone.
Definitely. So this first section, Understanding Lived Experiences, it uses these really smart questions to get you thinking. The first one sounds simple. What time of day is it?
Yeah. But the answer changes everything for many women, doesn't it? The perception of risk just skyrockets after dark. And it's a mix of things, poor lighting creating shadows, making it hard to see.
Or BC.
Exactly. That lack of passive surveillance, just fewer people around. And sometimes, feeling intimidated by large groups, often predominantly men, gathering in certain spaces at night.
But it's not just nighttime challenges, is it? Daylight has its own issues, like rush hour crowds, trying to navigate that with the stroller, or if you have mobility issues, can be really tough.
True. Crowded spaces might feel safer from certain threats, but they can bring other problems, like harassment or just feeling overwhelmed and unable to move freely.
Okay, next question. Which mode of transport should I use? This one really highlights some big differences.
Huge differences. The handbook mentions data, I think, from London showing Women are almost twice as likely as men to say safety concerns stop them from walking or cycling or using public transport.
Wow, twice as likely. And a massive factor there, sadly, is sexual harassment.
Yeah, it's depressingly common. Everything from staring, comments, right up to actual assault. And it affects women and girls of all ages. They mention girls as young as 10 experiencing this.
That's awful. And the handbook also rightly points out the high rates of harassment and violence faced by trans people in public spaces, too. It's a widespread problem.
And the transport hubs themselves, stations, bus stops, they can feel pretty unsafe, can't they?
Yeah.
Especially late at night or during quiet periods. Bad lighting, blind spots, not enough staff or other people around.
Plus, concerns about reliability. If the bus doesn't turn up, you're left waiting, maybe in a place that doesn't feel secure.
And road safety is another layer. Women and girls often perceive traffic danger differently. Fast cars, narrow pavements, it can feel intimidating if you're walking.
And the lack of safe cycle lanes plus the harassment risk puts many women off cycling, even if they'd like to.
Then there's this concept they mentioned, trip chaining.
Yes, I thought this was interesting.
It is. Because women still shoulder more caring responsibilities, they often make multiple short trips, school run, work, shops, pick up kids, linking journeys together. This often means more reliance on public transport or walking different routes, exposing them to more potential issues. And finally, basic accessibility steps, broken lifts, unclear path that hits women harder, especially those with disabilities or with children.
Okay, another question. Who am I with? We know traveling alone can feel more risky for many women.
Definitely. But even being in a group isn't always a guarantee of feeling safe. The handbook notes that groups of women or girls can sometimes attract unwanted attention, especially at night.
And the accessibility problems multiply when you're with others, right? Pavements too narrow to walk together, no ramps, nowhere accessible to change a baby or feed comfortably.
Exactly. It makes navigating spaces really difficult if you're with elderly relatives, kids, friends with disabilities. It impacts older women, disabled women, children, trans people, anyone with specific needs or caring for someone who has them.
This next question, what am I wearing? It really gets into some uncomfortable truths about victim blaming, doesn't it?
It does. It mentions UK stats showing a shocking number of people, men and women, still believe that wearing revealing clothing makes a woman more likely to be assaulted.
Which is just completely wrong, obviously. The handbook is very clear that's victim blaming, pure and simple.
Absolutely. But because that attitude exists, many women and girls change how they dress in public. Darker clothes, maybe baggier stuff, even wearing headphones sometimes, just to signal, don't approach me.
And thinking about footwear, choosing shoes you can run in just in case over what's comfortable or what you like, that says a lot.
It really does.
Yeah.
Then, can I see where I'm going? How visible will I be to others? This brings in sightlines, surveillance, both passive, just people around, and active, like CCTV or security staff. Being able to see clearly and feeling like you can be seen by others, that definitely contributes to feeling safer.
But there's a flip side to surveillance too, which the handbook acknowledges.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. For people who already feel marginalized, maybe because of their race, faith, disability, gender identity, whatever, more surveillance can actually feel threatening, like they're being targeted or watched with suspicion.
That's a really important nuance. And they also mention our reliance on phones now good signal, places to charge that's becoming part of feeling safe and connected to.
Definitely. Okay, next. How busy are my surroundings? This one's a bit of a balancing act.
That's so.
Well, really quiet, isolated places can feel risky, right? Lack of witnesses, feeling vulnerable. But then, very crowded places, especially if they feel dominated by, say, large groups of men, can also be intimidating.
Right, so neither extreme is necessarily ideal.
Exactly. And this might be partly why we're seeing more women-only spaces or queer spaces emerging. They offer a sense of safety for some, though the handbook cautions they need careful planning, consultation, so they don't end up creating different kinds of exclusion.
Makes sense. Then how much time do I have?
This links back to that trip chaining and caregiving. Time pressure can force women to take routes they wouldn't normally choose, maybe less well-lit or quieter, just because they're quicker.
And the need for places to just stop, to wait, to rest.
Yes. Comfortable, safe places to dwell. The handbook suggests many public spaces seem designed more for groups hanging out, often men, rather than someone needing a quiet, safe spot to wait for a bit.
And finally, the big question, tying it all together, is this positive or negative?
Yeah, that sums it up. Our experience of a place is subjective. It depends on who you are, your background, your past experiences. Design choices have a massive impact.
And the combined effect of all these negative factors leads to that idea of women shrinking their lives, limiting where they go, when they go, what they do. It's a constraint on their freedom, their participation.
It really is. Which leads us into part two, looking at the policy side of things and the push for change. The handbook maps out the existing framework laws like the Equality Act 2010, planning policies like the National Planning Policy Framework, the London Plan.
Mm-hmm. Mentioning things like inclusive design, public realm standards, childcare provision, public loos, the nighttime economy, all relevant stuff.
And the LLDC's own local plan, especially their policy on inclusive design, play spaces, health and safety.
But the key argument here is that while we have these general inclusive design policies,
Right.
there's been a gap, a lack of specific guidance focused squarely on gender equality, on the particular experiences of women and girls. This handbook aims to fill that gap.
Exactly. It sits alongside other documents, SPDs on planning obligations or the nighttime economy, LLDC's detailed standards on inclusive design or parks. But it adds that specific gender lens. And it connects local action to the bigger picture, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 5 on gender equality.
It's good to see the momentum building, too. They mention initiatives like the Mayor of London's Women's Night Safety Charter,
The Public London Charter, GLA's Good Growth by Design.
Safer Streets funding. It feels like there's a growing recognition that this matters.
Definitely. And they credit organizations like the GLA, Make Space for Girls, LODC itself, and local councils like Tower Hamlets and Newham who are actually putting gender-informed policies into their plans. Things are starting to shift.
And part two finishes with that crucial link to sustainability.
Yes. Climate change isn't gender neutral. It often hits women and girls harder, worsening existing inequalities. So access to good green spaces, parks, waterways is vital. And involving women and girls in designing these spaces, it leads to better, more sustainable outcomes that work for the whole community in the long run.
Okay, makes sense. Let's move to part three, taking action. This gets into the practical stuff. It mentions that LLDC baseline study from 2021.
Yeah, they identified specific hotspot areas needing attention, places like Stratford International, near Westfield, putting Mill Lane Station, parts of the Greenway, the canals, bits of the Olympic Park. So interventions there need to tackle the issues found in that research.
And then they lay out these 5 aims to guide action. These came from research with women and girls about what makes a positive space.
Right. The first is sense of ownership, belonging, and identity. Making spaces feel welcoming, like you belong there, you can be yourself.
Second, health and hygiene, comfort, and safety. Pretty fundamental, promoting well-being, feeling physically comfortable, and crucially, feeling safe from harm or harassment.
Third, empowered and enriched, giving women choice and influence in the space, providing clear information about what's there.
Fourth, accessibility and access to public realm and services. So truly inclusive design and making sure information is easy to get and understand.
And fifth, mobility and connectedness, enabling smooth journeys with real choices for safe walking, cycling, and public transport.
So those are the aims. Then they get into design considerations, the underlying principles, things like
Proportion and scale of spaces, proximity, how close things are to each other, continuity of routes and materials.
flexibility for different uses, programming how spaces are activated at different times, a variety of experiences.
Active versus passive engagement opportunities, the materials used, the overall vibrancy, containment versus permeability, how enclosed or open a space feels.
And uniqueness, creating a sense of place, and the overall user experience. Lots to think about there.
A whole toolkit of principles. Yeah. And then they detail specific interventions, practical design moves. Let's pick out a few key ones. Intervention 1 is lighting.
Always comes up first, doesn't it?
And for good reason. It's crucial for feeling safe. They stress needing expert input, but also doing participatory assessments, asking women locally how the lighting feels. Things to consider are color temperature, not too harsh, not too yellow consistency, avoiding dark patches.
The design of the lights themselves, so they're not easily vandalized.
Exactly. Layering light different heights, limiting glare. It's about creating that feeling of being seen safely, not just being able to see where you're putting your feet.
Intervention 2, security and surveillance, both active staff, CCTV and passive like shops with windows onto the street, homes overlooking parks.
Yeah, and they make that point again about perceptions varying. CCTV doesn't make everyone feel safer, and whatever measures are used, they must be well maintained to be effective. They mentioned the WalkSafe app as an example of tech helping people share info and feel a bit safer.
Intervention 3, nature and planting. Green space is great for well-being, we know that.
We do, but the handbook warns, Poorly designed or neglected planting can feel unsafe. Overgrown shrubs creating hiding places, that sort of thing.
Right, so it's about good connections between green areas, thinking about where planting goes relative to paths, funding the upkeep.
And creating positive sensory experiences, too. They mention the Safer Parks guidance for more detail.
Intervention 4, mobility infrastructure. Making walking, cycling, public transport feel like comfortable, safe choices.
This covers everything from designing safer transport hubs, tackling pinch points where crowds build up, clear and positive signage.
Not just don't do this signs, but helpful ones.
Exactly. Creating nodes of safety along routes, providing decent benches and shelters, real-time digital travel info. They cite Enjoy Waltham Forest and the Red Path Project as good examples.
Intervention 7 jumps to land use and site layout. Active frontages, shops, cafes facing the street make places feel safer.
Definitely. It's about avoiding dead frontages or blank walls. Thinking about activating ground floors, using meanwhile uses for empty sites, they mention the ABA arena bringing life to an area.
Managing construction sites better too, so they don't create dark, scary walkways around them.
And thinking about where service access points go.
Intervention 8, boundary treatments and spatial proportions. How walls, fences, buildings, hedges shape how a space feels. Transparency is key for things like fences, maintaining sightlines. Well-designed communal gardens or front gardens can add positively, but narrow, enclosed alleys, often problematic.
They mention a green hoarding pilot project, making construction sites look better, and integrating art like the Attic Park crafts. Little things can make a difference. Intervention 9. Wayfinding, signage, art, and interpretation. Helping people navigate, obviously, but also creating that sense of place, using local landmarks, cultural references.
And finally, Intervention 10, maintenance and monitoring. So important, but easily forgotten. A well-maintained place just feels safer and more cared for.
Absolutely. Visible maintenance staff, easy ways for people to report problems like the Love Clean Streets app. It shows someone's looking after the space.
And there are others too, routes, public furniture, accessible features. It's a really comprehensive list of potential actions.
It really is. Which brings us to part 4. Actors and tools for change. Who makes this happen and how? Key actors are local authorities and developers. But crucially, they need to partner up and work with women and girls, putting their experiences right at the center.
So for local authorities, what tools do they suggest?
Things like embedding gender equality in their main strategies, setting up specific project boards like the LLDC did, gathering good local evidence.
Ensuring long-term management is gender inclusive. Setting targets, KPIs, doing gender impact assessments for projects.
Using procurement to favor gender-responsive bidders, involving stakeholder groups, and importantly, using the planning system effectively. That includes Section 106 agreements to fund specific improvements. They mentioned Tower Hamlets being proactive on evidence gathering.
And for developers, what tools can they use?
Appointing a gender equity champion in their team. Building diverse teams. Using participatory methods, those exploratory walks, co-clienting, mapping assets, workshops, games even.
Right, getting genuine input.
Exactly. Having clear engagement plans, reimbursing people for their time, being aware of power dynamics, developing a specific gender-informed design statement, or GIDs for projects.
Guidance for construction sites too, and weaving this thinking through the whole design process, like the standard REBA plan of work stages.
And that role of a gender champion, they stress having one in both the council and the developer team, is really valuable. Someone whose job it is to keep asking the right questions.
Makes sense. And the final point in this section is about training.
Yes. Training on gender inclusion, unconscious bias, for everyone involved, planners, designers, counselors, developers. It's fundamental to changing mindsets and practices.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, if we boil down this deep dive into the Creating Places That Work for Women and Girls handbook, what's the main takeaway?
I think it's that designing with women and girls in mind isn't just a nice to have or only about gender equity, though it's vital for that. It actually leads to objectively better places, safer, more inclusive, more usable, more enjoyable. For everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That statistic you mentioned earlier really stuck with me too. Women being almost twice as likely to avoid walking or cycling due to safety fears. It just shows how basic freedom of movement is affected.
It really does crystallize the issue, doesn't it?
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Next time you're out and about in your area, just take a look with fresh eyes. Whose needs seem to have been the priority in how things are designed? And what small changes, maybe better lighting on that path you use, maybe just a bench in the right spot, could make a real difference to how safe and welcome women and girls feel.
And if this has sparked your interest, definitely seek out the handbook or other resources. It lists loads of reports, toolkits, case studies, groups working on this. Maybe even talk to your local council or engage with new developments happening near you.
Because ultimately, the potential is huge, isn't it? By taking this gender-informed approach seriously, we can really start building cities and towns that are not just fairer, but